He told me later that the smoke in the room was so thick he could have cut it with a knife. He was sitting at the head of a long, polished mahogany table, the air heavy with the scent of expensive cigars and the unspoken weight of business. This was his world, the one he commanded, Jack Forelli. The name alone made men in this city shift in their seats. He was in the middle of a transaction, the kind that did not involve receipts and was measured in kilos and loyalty, not dollars. His voice was low, a gravelly assurance that held the room captive. Across from him, two men, whose faces I will never know, nodded slowly. They knew better than to interrupt. No one ever interrupted Jack. Except that day, someone did. It was not a man who burst through the reinforced oak doors. It was a sound, a sharp digital ringing that sliced through the tension. Marco, his most trusted man, his shadow, flinched. His hand went to the inside of his jacket, a reflex I would come to know. But Jack just raised one hand, a signal to stay put. His face, which he described to me as a mask of calm, did not change. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a simple, black phone, not his usual one. This was the one he kept for reasons I still do not fully understand, a ghost line. He looked at the screen, a number he did not recognize. He would have ignored it, and he should have ignored it. He was closing a deal worth more than a city block. But something, a flicker of instinct that kept him alive all these years, made him press the answer button. He held the phone to his ear. He said nothing. He just listened. I often wonder what that moment was like for him. He was a man who controlled every room he entered, a man who built an empire on predicting the actions of others. But he could never have predicted this. He heard a voice, frantic and breathless. A man. Am I speaking to Jack Forelli? Jack's eyes, he told me, narrowed. He still said nothing. The voice on the other end grew more desperate. Please, my name is Dr. Samuel. I am a physician at New York General. You do not know me, but there is a woman here. She was brought in. She is in critical condition. Jack described the feeling as a cold drop of water on a hot stove, a hiss, an evaporation of everything else in the room. The men, the money, the smoke, all gone. What does this have to do with me? His voice was even colder than the feeling in his gut. There was a pause, a shaky breath. She has been shot. We are doing everything we can. She is on the edge, sir. She's fading, and your name is all she can say. She keeps repeating it. Jack, over and over. We found your number on a slip of paper in her pocket. Are you Jack? He never told me what he felt in that exact second. He was not a man who spoke of his own fear, but he described his actions, and they told me everything I needed to know. He stood up. The motion was so sudden, so violent that the two men across the table visibly startled. One of them, the larger one, started to rise. Marco's hand was no longer inside his jacket. The steel of his pistol was now resting on the table, pointed right at the man's chest. Sit down, Jack commanded. His voice was not loud, but it cracked like a whip. The man froze, then slowly, very slowly, Massina lowered himself back into his chair. Jack looked at Marco. He did not have to give an order. His face was enough. The meeting is over, he said to the room, his eyes already distant, already somewhere else. He was no longer a mafia boss closing a deal. He was just a man who had heard his name. But Mr. Forelli, one of the men protested, his voice weak. We have not concluded. Jack turned, a movement so quick it was almost a blur. He walked over to the man and leaned down, his face inches from the others. He did not touch him. He did not have to. You are right, Jack whispered, a sound more terrifying than any shout. We have not concluded. And now, I believe I will take an additional 10% for the inconvenience. Marco will finalize the details. Get out. He did not wait to see them leave. He was already moving toward the door, the black phone still clutched in his hand. He was on the street in seconds, the heavy doors of the restaurant slamming shut behind him, leaving Marco to clean up the mess. The black sedan, long and sleek as a panther, was waiting. The engine was already running. His driver, a man named Sal, saw the look on Jack's face and had the back door open before he even reached the curb. "New York General," Jack snapped as he threw himself into the back seat, "and drive like you mean it." The car shot forward, merging into the unforgiving New York City traffic with a squeal of tires. Jack stared, unseeing, out the armored window. The city lights blurred into long streaks of neon and white, a watercolor painting of a life he knew so well. He was born in these streets. He had fought for them, bled for them. He knew every dark alley, every hidden shortcut, every place where danger lurked. He was not a man who was easily shaken. But as the car sped through the night, a profound sense of unease settled over him. It was not fear. He had not felt true fear in over a decade. It was something else, something raw and unfamiliar. It was a gnawing anxiety, a terrible, pulsing dread that tightened his chest and made his palms sweat. It was concern, a deep, unwelcome, and terrifying concern for a woman he thought he had successfully pushed to the very edges of his life, a woman who had no place in his world, a woman he had only met a handful of times. Emily Lawson. He pictured her face, not as she must be now, broken and bleeding in a hospital bed, but as he had first seen her 3 months ago. Her hair, the color of honey, was tied back. Her face was tired, but her eyes were bright, impossibly alive in the sterile, white environment of a hospital. She was a doctor. She fixed people. He broke them. The contrast had been so stark it had amused him at first. Now, that amusement was gone, replaced by a storm of questions that crashed in his mind with the force of the city racing by. What had happened to her who would dare to touch a civilian, a doctor? And why, in her moment of desperation, on the very edge of her life, was his name the only one she could say? He had been so careful. He had kept his distance, admiring her from afar, a beautiful, untouchable piece of art in a world he could never inhabit. He had told himself it was for her own protection. He was a walking shadow, and he refused to let that shadow fall on someone so full of light. But it seemed the shadow had found her anyway. Or, he thought, his blood turning to ice in his veins, had the shadow been sent? Was this a message? A new, depraved tactic from one of his rivals using an innocent woman to get to him? The thought made a bile rise in his throat, a rage so potent it nearly blinded him. The car took a sharp turn, throwing him against the leather seat. He barely noticed. His hands balled into fists, his knuckles white. He looked down at them, at the scars and calluses that told the story of his life, a life of violence, of power, of unforgiving rules. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Jack Farrelly, the undisputed king of New York's underworld, felt completely and utterly powerless. The city he ruled was just a blur outside his window, and he was just a man in a car, racing toward a woman whose name he barely had the right to know, let alone be the only one she called. It all started 3 months ago, and it was nothing like you were imagining. There was no thunderclap, no dramatic music. There was just the smell of antiseptic, the squeak of my own exhausted sneakers on the linoleum, and a man visiting a patient. I was finishing a 36-hour shift at New York General. My hair was in a messy bun that had given up hours ago, and my scrubs were probably stained with things I did not want to identify. I was running on fumes and the acidic hospital coffee. My patient in room 302 was a man named Mr. Volpe, a large, gruff man who had come in with a bullet in his shoulder. He had told the intake nurse he had a construction accident, which was the most creative excuse for a gunshot wound I had heard all week. He was unpleasant, demanding, and had a permanent scowl. And he had visitors, not the kind that bring flowers. His room was always attended by a younger, quiet man who sat outside the door like a gargoyle. That day, there was a different man inside the room. When I walked in with my chart, the air in the room changed. Mr. Volpe, who had been complaining loudly just a moment before, went silent. The man standing by the window turned, and the first thing I noticed was his suit. It was not just expensive, it was perfect. A deep charcoal gray that probably cost more than my last 3 paychecks. He was tall, with dark hair cut short, and a face that looked like it had been carved from hard, handsome stone. He had the kind of stillness that is more intimidating than any amount of shouting. "Dr. Lawson," I said, walking to the bed and pointedly ignoring him for a second. "Mr. Volpe, how is the pain?" "Mr. Volpe just grunted and looked at the man by the window. The man stepped forward. "He's fine. How much longer will he be here?" His voice was low, a deep gravel that rumbled in his chest. It was not a question so much as a demand for information. I turned to him. Finally. I was too tired to be intimidated. That depends on his recovery, and on whether he can avoid any more construction accidents. I looked at the man. I expected a flicker of amusement, maybe a smirk. I got nothing. He just watched me, his eyes a dark, unreadable shade of brown. They were assessing me, not as a person, but as a problem, or perhaps a tool. "You are his physician?" he asked. "I am the surgical resident on call. I assisted with his procedure," I said, scribbling a note on the chart. He nodded slowly. "You did good work." It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same finality as a judge's gavel. He looked back at Mr. Volpe. "We are leaving." "He is not cleared for discharge," I said, my pen stopping. "He needs observation for at least another 24 hours. The man turned his gaze back to me. It was not angry. It was just heavy, like a physical weight. "He will have all the observation he needs, just not here. Get his papers ready." I bristled. "I cannot do that. It is against hospital policy and my medical judgment." He held my gaze for a long moment. I felt like he was seeing every doubt I ever had, every test I had ever failed. And then he did something I did not expect. He smiled, or at least the corner of his mouth twitched. It was a small, dangerous thing. "Dr. Lawson," he said, his voice softer now, "I understand you have your rules, but Mr. Volpe has business, and he is a very private man. We will have a private nurse, the best. We will sign any papers you need. We will absolve you and this hospital of all responsibility, but he is leaving in 1 hour." He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stated the new reality. And I, a doctor trained to fight for my patient's health, knew I had just lost a battle. I also knew it was not a battle I ever had a chance of winning. I looked at Mr. Dean Volpe, who was suddenly looking much better. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "I will get the against medical advice forms." "Thank you," he said. And that was it. I saw him a few more times over the next few weeks. His name, I found out, was Jack. Just Jack. He was back visiting Mr. Volpe for follow-ups. Then I saw him in the cafeteria at 3 in the morning when I was on another marathon shift. He was sitting alone at a table, in another perfect suit, nursing a cup of black coffee. He looked up as I passed. "Dr. Lawson," he said, a simple acknowledgement. I was too tired to be surprised. "Mr. Forelli," I replied, having seen the name on Mr. Volpe's visitor log. He raised an eyebrow. "Just Jack is fine." He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Please." I should have kept walking. I should have been terrified. But I was so exhausted, the social filters were all gone. I sat down. He pushed a muffin, still in its plastic wrapper, across the table. "You look like you're about to fall over," he said. "Comes with the job," I mumbled, unwrapping the muffin. It was blueberry. I hated blueberry. I ate it anyway. We sat in silence for a few minutes. It was strange. He was this intense, powerful presence. But the silence was not uncomfortable. It was just quiet. "Why are you here?" I asked. "My associate, Mr. Volpe. He has a final checkup. At 3 in the morning. He almost smiled again. He prefers to avoid crowds. "Right. I finished the muffin. Well, I should... Emily." He said my name. It was the first time. It sounded different in his voice, less like a name, more like a possession. I looked up. Be careful, this is a hard city, even in a hospital. And that was it. He stood up, left his half-finished coffee, and walked out. I watched him go. I did not know who he was. Not really. I just knew he was unlike anyone I'd ever met. He was a puzzle, a dark, confusing shape in my very logical black and white world. I only saw him one more time after that, a brief nod in the hallway. Our entire relationship, if you could even call it that, consisted of maybe 10 minutes of actual conversation. But he felt a pull. He told me that later. He said he was too busy, too wrapped up in his work to pursue it. His work, I would come to find out, was running the Forelli crime family. He was not just a boss, he was the boss. He was a man who lived in a world of violence, loyalty, and relentless competition. He was the leader of a dynasty, a king in a kingdom of shadows. His life was a web of power and relationships so tangled, so dangerous, that one wrong move could bring it all crashing down. He told me, much later, in a rare moment of honesty, that he was lonely, utterly, profoundly lonely in his world. Every person, every conversation was a transaction. Everyone wanted something. Everyone was a potential threat or a potential tool. There was no one he could just be with. And then he saw me, a tired, overworked doctor who talked back to him, who had no idea who he was, and who lived by a code of saving lives, not taking them. He said I was the first real person he had spoken to in a decade. So he kept his distance. He was busy, yes, but that was not the real reason. He was protecting me. He was a shark, and he knew it, and he was trying to keep the one small, colorful fish he admired from getting caught in his wake. His interest was remote because it had to be. He was trying to keep his world from touching mine. But as I lie here now, in the sterile white of a hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor, the only thing keeping me anchored, I know that he failed. His world and mine have collided with all the force of a high-speed crash, and in the wreckage, as the darkness pulls me under, his name is the only one I can find. Jack. 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 He told me later that the ride to New York General was the longest journey of his life. Sal, his driver, was one of the best. He cut through the city's late-night traffic with an aggressive grace, turning the 10-minute drive into 6. But for Jack, sitting in the silence of the back seat, every second stretched into an eternity. The sedan was a cage. He was a man of action, a man who bent the world to his will, and he was completely, agonizingly useless. He was staring out the window but not seeing the city he owned. He was seeing her face, Emily Lawson. He replayed their few interactions with a new, frantic intensity. The first meeting, when she had looked at him with tired defiance, unaware she was speaking to a man who could end her with a single word. The second time, in the cafeteria at 3 a.m, that moment, he admitted to me, had stuck with him. He had seen hundreds of women, beautiful, powerful women who threw themselves at him, but this one, with her rumpled scrubs and her exhaustion, had a core of goodness. It was a word he rarely used, a quality he did not possess. He had felt the pull, a dangerous curiosity, and he had immediately shut it down. He had built his empire by excising all vulnerabilities. He had no weaknesses. Until tonight. The doctor's words echoed in his head. A torment. She is on the edge. Your name is all she can say. Why his name? It made no sense. They did not know each other. He was a ghost in her life, a fleeting, dark impression. It should have been her mother's name, or a friend's, not his. He felt the unwelcome prickle of an emotion he had buried decades ago. It was helplessness. It was the feeling of watching something precious slip through his fingers. He had not said a dozen words to her, and yet the thought of her not existing, of her light being snuffed out, made him feel a cold, hollow dread. He had suppressed every impulse, every fleeting thought of her. He had told himself it was for her protection. He was a walking plague, and he would not infect her. But the plague had found her anyway. This realization brought another, more familiar emotion, rage, a cold, precise fury that sharpened his senses. He did not know who had done this, but he knew one thing. In his world, there were no accidents. Every bullet had a sender. Every action had a motive. This was not a random street mugging. This was a message. He pulled his business phone from his jacket. His thumb was steady as he dialed Marco's number. "Boss." Marco answered on the first ring. He sounded composed, but Jack could hear the controlled adrenaline. "The meeting," Jack said, his voice flat and hard. "It is done. They will pay." "Yes, but Jack, what is happening? Where are you going?" "New York General." There was a beat of silence. Marco was the only man alive who could pause like that with Jack. "Is it one of our men?" "No," Jack said. His jaw tightened. "It is a civilian, a woman." Another pause, longer this time. "Boss, I do not understand." "You do not need to understand," Jack snapped, the lack of control in the situation making him harsh. "You need to find out. Someone shot a doctor tonight. Her name is Emily Lawson. She works at New York General. I want to know who. I want to know why. I want to know what she saw, where she was, who she spoke to for the last 48 hours. I want every camera, every whisper. Turn this city upside down and find the man who pulled the trigger." "A civilian doctor," Marco said, his voice low, processing the implications. This is not clean, Jack." "Of course it is not clean," Jack growled. "It is a message. Someone is telling me they can touch anyone. Someone is telling me they know. They know she matters." "Does she?" Marco's question was quiet, respectful, but it was the question Jack was asking himself. Jack looked at the blurred lights of the city. He thought of her tired smile. "She matters enough. Find him. Marco, find him. And when you do, you bring him to me. He's mine." He ended the call without waiting for a reply. He leaned his head back against the cool leather. He was already moving pieces on the board. He was back in control. At least, that is what he told himself. But the knot in his stomach, that cold, sick feeling of powerlessness, it did not go away. He was a man who commanded an army, who held the fate of families in his hands, and he was terrified of what he would find in a hospital room. He was terrified of what he felt. The sedan finally screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance. Sal did not even bother to pull to the curb. He just stopped, blocking the entire lane. Jack was out of the car before the engine noise had settled, his long, dark coat sweeping behind him. He pushed through the glass doors, and the chaos of the emergency room seemed to slow down. The nurses shouting, the families crying, the weary-looking cops. He was a creature from another world, a block of Arctic ice dropped into a boiling pot. He walked directly to the admissions desk, his presence silencing the triage nurse who was in the middle of a question. "I am here for Emily Lawson." "Hi, Kia," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room. The nurse, a young woman with weary eyes, looked at his suit, his face, and clearly did not know what to do. She is in surgical trauma, sir. Are you family?" "I am Jack Farelli," he said, as if that explained everything. To him, it did. "I was called by a Dr. Samuel. Get him." The nurse's eyes widened in recognition, or perhaps just fear. She fumbled with the phone. Yes, sir. One moment." Jack stood there, immobile. He hated hospitals. There were places where control was an illusion, where life and death were decided by machines and the tired, fallible hands of people like Emily. He looked at his own hands. They were not fallible. They were strong, scarred, and they had never failed him. And yet, they could not do the one thing he wanted. They could not reach into that operating room and pull her back from the edge. He was a king, a boss, a man who built an empire on the foundation of his own strength, and he had never felt so weak in his entire life. He was drowning, and he had not even realized he was in the water. The only thing he knew for certain was that he was going to find the person who pushed him in. and he was going to drag them down into the dark with him. The waiting room was a sterile, beige purgatory. It smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a place where time went to die. Jack stood in the middle of the room, his dark coat still on, his hands clenched at his sides. He had refused to sit. He had refused the cup of water a terrified nurse offered him. He was a statue of barely contained violence, and the few other people in the room nursing their own minor. Midnight tragedies had huddled on the opposite side, as if by instinct. A man in light blue scrubs pushed through a set of double doors, his face etched with exhaustion. He was older, with thinning gray hair and kind, bloodshot eyes. He looked at the nurse at the desk, who subtly pointed her chin toward Jack. The man, Dr. Samuel, walked over, his expression grim. "Mr. Forelli," he said, his voice low. Jack turned. "Where is she?" "She is in surgery. She has been for almost 2 hours. The doctor said he was not intimidated. He was just tired. She was shot twice. One bullet went clean through her shoulder. The other is more complicated. It's lodged near her spine." Jack's face did not change, but his stillness became more profound. "Will she live?" Dr. Samuel sighed, rubbing his face. "I am not her surgeon. He's the best we have, but I have to be honest with you. It is on the edge. The next few hours will tell us everything. I am so sorry. We are doing everything we can." "You said she was talking," Jack said, his voice a low gravel. "You said she said my name." The doctor nodded. "She was fading when she came in, but she was fighting. She was delirious, but she kept repeating one word, Jack, over and over, like she was trying to tell us something. It is why we called. The paper in her pocket, it just had your name and this number. We did not know who else to contact." Jack just stared at him. He was a man who lived in a world of whispers, where his name was a currency of fear and power. To hear it had been her lifeline. Her desperate anchor made no sense. It was a debt he did not know how to repay. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He turned away from the doctor, a curt dismissal, and answered it. "Marco." "Boss?" Marco's voice was tight. "All business. I have got something. The security cameras on her street are a mess, but I pulled a feed from a deli 2 blocks over. A black sedan, no plates, custom windows. It rolled past her apartment building 3 times in the hour before the shooting. It is a car from Victor Rocco's fleet. I am sure of it." A cold, familiar hatred settled in Jack's gut. Victor Rocco, a rival. A man whose ambition was as large as his sadism. A man who had been making small, annoying moves for months, trying to chip away at Jack's territory. "He did this," Jack said. "It was not a question." "It looks that way, boss. But why a doctor? It is not his style. It is sloppy. It brings heat." "Find out," Jack said. "Find out why." He hung up the phone and looked back at Dr. Samuel, who was watching him with a new, wary understanding. "She needs security," Jack stated. He walked over to the bank of phones on the wall, ignoring the cell phone in his hand. He dialed a number from memory. "Sal, I want 2 men at the entrance to the surgical wing. I want 2 more in the waiting room. No one, and I mean no one, gets near Dr. Lawson or her physicians without my permission. Do you understand?" He listened for a moment. "Good." He hung up and turned back to the beige room. The wait began. He stood for an hour, then he sat. He looked at a clock. 3:17 in the morning, 4:21, each tick was a hammer blow against his sanity. His world, a world of speed and decisive action, had ground to a halt. He was at the mercy of another man's skill, another man in scrubs. His other phone rang, the family phone. He looked at the name and his jaw tightened. Uncle Paolo, his father's consigliere. And now He answered, "Paolo." "Jack," the old man's voice was raspy, like dry leaves. "I am hearing troubling things. Get some sleep, Uncle. It is late." Sleep is for men who are not at war, and you have just declared it. You walked out of a meeting. You insulted the Caparelli brothers. You added 10%, Jack, 10% for an inconvenience. And now, My sources tell me you have sealed off a floor at New York General, all for a woman, a civilian. She is not the issue, Paolo, Jack said, keeping his voice low, but the fury was simmering just beneath the surface. She is the message. Then you answer the message, Paolo's voice rose. You do not abandon the field to sit by a bed. Victor Rocco is making moves. He's meeting with the unions. He's laughing. Jack. He's telling everyone that the great Jack Forelli has found a weakness, that he can be controlled by a slip of a girl. A fire, hotter than anything he had ever felt, shot through Jack. He stood up and walked to a quiet corner, turning his back to the room. Paolo, he said, and his voice was so cold it could have frozen water. You listen to me. You tell my cousins. You tell the capos. And you tell anyone who will listen. This is not weakness. This is a reckoning. You tell Victor Rocco that he was right to send a message, and now I am going to send one back. You tell him to enjoy his meetings, to enjoy his laughter, because it will be the last time he ever does. He paused, the silence on the other end a heavy, frightened thing. You handle the families. I am handling this. Am I clear? Jack, be careful. This is not our way. This is messy. It is about to get a lot messier. He hung up the phone, ending the conversation. He was now fighting on two fronts, against his enemies and against his own family, who saw his concern as a liability they did not understand. To them, Emily was a pawn, a piece of collateral. But as he stood there, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic, he realized with a sickening clarity that she was more than that. He did not know what she was, but the thought of losing her, this woman he barely knew, was not a business calculation. It was an amputation. His phone vibrated again. Marco. Talk to me. We got him, Marco said, and now Jack could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. We found the sedan, torched, under the bridge, but they were sloppy. One of Rocco's men, a low-level punk named Tommy Slug Gaddy. He was seen running from the fire. We persuaded him to talk. Jack waited. It was exactly what you thought, boss, but worse. Dr. Lawson, she was not the original target, not directly. Explain, Jack commanded. She was taking a shortcut home 2 nights ago. She works late. She cuts through the alley behind the old cannery. She walked right into a deal. Rocco's men were meeting some new players, moving a shipment. She saw them. She saw their faces. She bolted. Jack closed his eyes, so they silenced a witness. No, boss, that is the thing. They were going to... But as they were planning it, one of Rocco's men recognized her, not from the alley, from a picture. He had seen her in a photo from that hospital charity dinner a few months back, the one you attended. Jack's blood went cold. He remembered that night, standing in the back, in the shadows, watching her. She had been in a simple blue dress, laughing with her colleagues, and he had thought she was the only real thing in the room. He saw her, Marco continued, his voice heavy, and he saw you, in the background. You were looking at her, the guy, Slug. He said Rocco became obsessed with it. He thought she was your secret, your woman on the side. He did not just want to silence a witness, Jack. He wanted to send you the message. He wanted to see if you would bleed. He used her to test you. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of such cold, depraved cruelty that Jack felt his knees almost buckle. This was not about territory. This was not about money. This was about him. His one unguarded moment of admiration, caught by a camera, had been twisted into a weapon. He had done this. His shadow, the one he had tried so hard to keep away from her, had not just touched her. It had painted a target on her back. He heard a sound, the squeak of surgical scrubs. He opened his eyes. The double doors had opened. The surgeon, a different man from Dr. Samuel, was walking out. He was pulling off his surgical cap. His face was a mask of professional exhaustion. Jack Forelli hung up the phone on Marco. His entire world, the complex web of his empire and the new, terrifying terrain of his heart, shrank to the space of that beige waiting room. He was the boss, the king, the predator. And he had never been more of a prisoner. He took a step toward the surgeon, his entire life hanging on the next word. The surgeon's name tag read Dr. Patel. He was a small man, but he carried an aura of absolute, exhausted authority. He looked at Jack, and his gaze was not fearful, just professionally flat. "Mr. Forelli," he said, his voice clipped. "She is out of surgery. The operation was complex. We removed the bullet. It had fragmented near the T7 vertebra. We believe we got all of it." The beige waiting room, with its stale air and flickering fluorescent light, seemed to hold its breath. Jack's own heart, which he had not been aware of, was a cold, hard knot in his chest. And Jack's voice was a rasp. "And she is alive," Dr. Patel said. "She's in the surgical intensive care unit. She is stable for now. But I will not lie to you. The next 48 hours are critical. The damage, it is significant. We do not know the extent of the neurological impact. We do not know if she will. If she will, what Jack took a step closer." The two men he had posted in the waiting room subtly shifted, their hands disappearing into their coats. Dr. Patel did not flinch. He had clearly faced down death, and he was not impressed by this man's imitation of it. "We do not know if she will walk, or what her recovery will look like. She's in a medically induced coma to allow the swelling to go down. All we can do now is wait." Jack just stared at him. Alive. The word hung in the air. It was not a victory. It was a reprieve. A stay of execution. It was just enough. "Can I see her?" "She is in intensive care. Only immediate family." "I am seeing her," Jack said. It was not a request. It was a statement of a future that would, one way or another, occur. Dr. Patel looked at this strange, dark man. This name the patient had whispered. He saw the two men by the door, the absolute, unwavering certainty in Jack's eyes. He sighed. 5 minutes, after she is settled, a nurse will come for you." The doctor turned and walked back through the double doors, leaving Jack alone again in the beige purgatory. Alive. He did not feel relief. He did not feel joy. He felt a white-hot, cleansing fire. He had a window. 48 hours. He had 48 hours to burn down the world of the man who had done this. He walked past his men. "You know your orders. No one gets on this floor. No one." He hit the button for the elevator, his reflection a dark specter in the polished steel doors. He did not go back to the street. He went to the roof. The cold, early morning air hit him like a slap. The city was spread out below him, a carpet of glittering, indifferent lights. He dialed Marco's number. "Boss," Marco answered. He sounded like he was in a car. "She is alive. Barely. He's holding Tommy Gaddy." "Yes, in the warehouse. The old meatpacking one. He is talking." "Where is Victor Rocco?" A pause. "Boss, he is at his club. The Silencio. He's surrounded by his men. He's celebrating. He thinks he won. He thinks he showed you are weak." "Good," Jack said. He looked at the skyline. "I am coming. I want you to pick me up at the rear entrance. And Marco, I want you to bring Victor to the warehouse. Now." "Jack, that is impossible. His club is a fortress. To take him from there, it is a declaration of war. The family." "The family," Jack said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "is about to see what happens when you touch what is mine. You are my consigliere. Marco. So, advise me. How do we do it?" Marco was silent for a full 10 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder, resolved. "The club has a back kitchen. The deliveries come in at 5 in the morning. Victor is a creature of habit. He will be in his office, drinking your share of the profits. We do not go in the front. We go in through the loading bay, but it will be loud. Jack, there is no quiet way." "I do not want quiet," Jack said. "I want him to know I am coming." He hung up. He rode the elevator down to the loading bay, a different man than the one who had entered the hospital. The helplessness was gone. The weakness had been burned away. All that was left was purpose. The drive to the warehouse was silent. Jack sat in the back of the sedan, Marco at his side. The city blurred by. Jack was not thinking about Emily. He could not. To think of her warmth, of her light, was to dilute the poison he needed to be. He was thinking of Victor. He was thinking of a world that allowed a man like Victor to exist. They arrived at the meatpacking warehouse. The air smelled of rust and cold iron. Jack walked in. In the center of the vast, empty space, a single light hung over a chair. Tommy Slug Gaddy was tied to it, his face a swollen, bloody mess. He was unconscious. "He is the one who saw us," Marco said quietly, gesturing to the broken man. "He is the one who told Victor. He is the reason." Jack looked at the man, this low-level instrument of his pain, and felt nothing. He was just a tool. The hand that wielded him was what mattered. An hour passed. Jack stood in the shadows, unmoving. He waited. He heard the sound of cars, a muffled shout, and then the heavy scrape of the metal door. Marco's men, a dozen of them, the most loyal of the Forelli family, flooded the room, and in the center of them, held between two of Jack's largest men, was Victor Rocco. He was not arrogant now. His suit was torn. He had a cut over one eye. But when he saw Jack emerge from the shadows, a sneer returned to his face. "Forelli," he spat. "So, it is war. All this?" For a doctor, he laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "I knew it. I knew you were soft. I told them all. The great Jack Forelli. Brought down by a woman he did not even have the guts to claim." Jack walked toward him, his steps slow, measured. "You thought she was a pawn." "She was," Victor yelled, straining against the men holding him. "She was a message to show you that I can touch anything I want, that I can take anything from you." "You were right," Jack said. He stopped, just out of arm's length. "She is my weakness, the only one, and you, in your stupidity. You found it. You found the one thing in this world I care about more than power, more than money, more than the family itself." Victor's eyes widened. He saw it then. The truth. This was not a negotiation. This was not about territory. "Jack, wait," he stammered. "We can make a deal. I will give you 10%, 20 I will get out of the city." Jack looked at Marco, who was watching his boss, his friend, with a look of awe and terror. The rest of the family, the cousins and the capos who had doubted him, were silent. They were watching a king. "In our world," Jack said, his voice echoing in the cold space, "there are rules. We do not touch civilians. We do not touch the innocent, not for sport, not to send a message," and he looked at Victor. "You broke the rules." "You are the rule breaker," Jack Victor screamed, his fear making him desperate. "You and your love. It makes you weak. The family knows it. They will not follow you." Jack smiled. It was the same small, dangerous smile he had given me in the hospital all those months ago. "You are wrong, Victor. It does not make me weak. It makes me focused. It gives me a reason. You hurt her. You used her to test me." He stepped forward and took a heavy wrench from a nearby table. "Consider the test over." It was not a long fight. It was an execution. It was brutal. And it was personal. Jack did not let his men do it. He did it himself. He poured every ounce of his rage, his fear, his helplessness into it. He was not just killing a rival. He was killing his old self. He was sacrificing the part of him that lived by the old codes. His new code was simple. Protect Emily. At any cost. When it was over, he was breathing heavily. He was splattered with the consequences of his choice. He dropped the wrench. It clanged on the concrete, the sound echoing in the profound silence. He turned to his family. To Marco, they were staring at him, not with disgust, not with fear, but with a new, absolute loyalty. He had not shown weakness. He had shown them what he was willing to do for something he loved. He had shown them a strength they had never known. Jack walked out of the warehouse, stripping off his soiled gloves. He did not look back. He got into the back of his sedan. The sun was just beginning to touch the sky. painting the clouds in shades of bloody orange and bruised purple. He had won. He had eliminated the threat. He had solidified his power. And as the car sped back toward New York General, back toward her, he was faced with the devastating, impossible truth. He had just proven, in the most brutal way possible, that his world was poison. He'd just become the very monster he needed to protect her from. He'd saved her life, perhaps. But how? He wondered. Could he ever be in it? Now that he knew the only way to love her was to be the man who had just walked out of that warehouse, the man who could never, ever let her see him. He did not go straight back to her room. He could not. The man who had walked out of that warehouse was not a man who could stand in a sterile intensive care unit. He was a creature of blood and iron, and she was a problem he did not yet know how to solve. He had Sal drive him to his penthouse, the glass tower that overlooked the city he had just reconquered. He walked into the marble foyer, past his own reflection, a man in a flawless dark suit with death in his eyes. He said nothing to the staff. He went to his bathroom, a room larger than my first apartment, and stood under a stream of water so hot it should have scalded him. He scrubbed his skin until it was raw, as if he could wash away the scent of Victor Rocco, the feel of the wrench, the entire life he had built. It did not work. He knew it would not. He emerged an hour later, dressed in another perfect suit. This one was a deep, funereal black. He was a new man, a widower to his old self. He had Sal drive him back to the hospital, the morning light now a harsh, accusatory gray. When he arrived, the floor was his. His men were at the elevators, at the stairwells. They were polite, but they were stone. The hospital staff, the nurses, even Dr. Patel, moved around them with a new, quiet deference. The word was out. This was Forelli territory now. A nurse, the same one from the night before, her eyes wide with a fear she was trying to hide, met him at the nurse's station. She is stable. Mr. Forelli. Her vitals are holding. He just nodded. I am going in. Yes, sir. You must wear this, she said, handing him a yellow isolation gown. He looked at the flimsy piece of paper and fabric with disdain. But he put it on. It was a rule, and in this small, sterile world, he was not the one who made them. He tied it, feeling ridiculous, like a giant in a child's costume. He pushed open the door to her room, and that is when, he told me, his world truly, finally fell apart. It was not a room. It was a nexus of machines. There were beeps and hisses, and the slow, steady rhythm of the ventilator that was breathing for her. And in the middle of it all, she was so small. I was not Emily Lawson, the defiant doctor. I was a collection of tubes and wires. My face was pale, waxy, and swollen. My hair was matted. A tube was taped to my mouth. He saw the white of the bandages on my shoulder and the terrifying, rigid brace that encased my neck and torso. He had seen death. He had dealt it. He had lived with it his entire life. But this halfway state, this fragile, flickering, was something he could not comprehend. It was an obscenity. He stood by the door for a long time, when he said his legs would not move. The man who had just dismantled a rival's empire with his bare hands was terrified of the sound of his own footsteps on the linoleum. He finally moved, pulling a chair to the side of the bed. He sat. He did not touch me. He was afraid he would break me. Or perhaps he was afraid I would be cold. He just watched. He watched the numbers on the screen, green and red. He watched the rise and fall of my chest, a movement that was not my own. He sat for an hour, then 2. His men brought him coffee. He did not drink it. His uncle, Paolo, called. He did not answer. The only thing that existed was the sound of the machines. He knew what he had done. He had won the war. He had avenged me. He had secured his throne, and in doing so, he had proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that he was the one thing in this world that could never, ever be near me. His love, his obsession, his whatever this feeling was, it was a homing beacon for violence. He was the problem. He made his decision in the beep and hiss silence of that room. He pulled out his phone, not the family phone, his business phone, the one he used for his legitimate holdings. He did not call Marco. He did not call Paolo. He called his lawyer, Michael. He said, his voice a low whisper, "It is Jack. I want you to start the process. I am liquidating. Yes, all of it. The shipping concerns, the waste management, all of it. I want it clean. I do not care what the tax implications are. I want it turned into cash, and I want that cash moved into the holding companies in Switzerland. Yes, all of it. By the end of the month." He hung up, and he made a second call to a real estate broker. "I need a property, not in New York, far away. Montana, maybe, or Wyoming. It needs to be quiet. It needs to be secure, and it needs to be ready in a week." He made a third call. "Dr. Patel, it is Jack Forelli. I am outside her room. I need to know. What is the best spinal recovery center in the world? I see in Switzerland. Yes, I want her moved there as soon as she is stable. I do not care what it costs. You will arrange it. You will go with her. You will be in charge. Your family, your practice, everything here. It will be taken care of. You work for me now." He put the phone away, and he had just started a new war, a different one. It was not about tearing down. It was about building. He was dismantling his dark kingdom, brick by bloody brick. He was going to build a new one, a clean one, a fortress so high, so secure, so legitimate, that the darkness could never find its way in. Marco found him like that. Hours later, Jack was still in the yellow gown, staring at my face as if he could will me to wake up. "Boss?" Marco said quietly from the doorway. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. He had cleaned up the warehouse. He had dealt with the family. "She is the same," Jack said. It was not a question. "Jack," Marco said, stepping in. "Paolo is concerned. The families they are quiet. You did what you had to do. You showed them. Now, we have to move. We have to consolidate. We have to—" "No," Jack said. Marco stopped. "No, I am done," Jack said. His eyes never leaving my face. "The old business. It is yours. You and Paolo. You run it. You take the percentage. I am out." Marco stared. "Jack, you cannot be serious. You do not just get out. This is your life. It is our life. It almost ended hers," Jack said. His voice was flat. "It is not a life. It is a cage, and I will not let it touch her again." So what Marco said, his voice rising in disbelief, "You run. You take her and you hide. They will find you. Jack, they will always find you. You are Jack Forelli." "I am not running," Jack said. He finally turned to look at his friend. He looked at Marco, the man who had been his shadow, his brother in all but blood. "I am changing the game. I am moving into the legitimate world, the hotels, the tech, the finance, the real power. The kind of power that does not need a wrench, the kind that crushes men like Victor Rocco with a phone call, not a bullet." Marco saw it then. This was not a surrender. This was an escalation. Jack was not getting out. He was moving up. "It will not be easy," Marco said, his voice low. "It is the only way," Jack said. He looked back at me. "I did this to her. Marco, my world, my weakness. I will not let it be the thing that defines her, or me." He was determined. He would build a new life, a new, purposeful life. He would become a man worthy of her. Even if she never woke up to see it, he would create a world so safe, so clean, that if she ever did open her eyes, she would only see good. He told me he reached out then. For the first time, he brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. His hand, the same one that had ended a man's life just hours before, was trembling. He was Jack Forelli. He was a mafia boss. He was a killer. And in that moment, he was a man in love, a man who had finally found a reason to live in a world that was still full of darkness. He would be her shield. He would be her fortress. He would be anything he had to be. He just needed me to live. The beeping of the monitor was the metronome of my world for a long time, But the first sound I remember, the first thing that broke through the gray fog, was his voice. It was not the low, gravelly command he used on his men, the one I had heard in Mr. Volpe's room. It was a whisper, a soft, hesitant sound, reading to me, not from a newspaper, not from a business report, from a book of poems. I could not open my eyes, but I heard him. He was reading about the sea. Waking up was not a cinematic moment. It was a slow, agonizing crawl back to a body that felt like a stranger's. It was pain and confusion and a terrifying inability to feel my legs. I learned to breathe on my own again. I learned to swallow. And through it all, he was there. He was not Jack Forelli, the man in the perfect suit. He was just Jack. He wore dark sweaters and jeans. He looked tired. He never left. He was there when Dr. Patel, who had somehow become my personal physician, told me with a kind, sad face that the damage to my spine was severe, that I might never walk. I cried. I raged. I fell into a black pit of despair, and he just sat there. He did not offer platitudes. He did not tell me it would be okay. He just stayed. When I was finally able to speak, my voice a dry rasp, I asked him, "Why?" He looked at me, his dark eyes holding a universe of things I did not understand. "Because," he said, his voice raw, "it is my fault." And he told me not everything, not about the warehouse or Victor Rocco or the added 10%, but he told me about the world he came from. He told me that my seeing him, that his seeing me had been enough to put a target on my back. He told me he was a shadow and he had been careless. I should have been terrified. I should have told him to leave, to get this dark, dangerous man away from me. But I was a doctor. I had spent my life looking at the mechanics of people, their hearts and their bones, and as I looked at him, I saw a man who was as broken as I was. He was trapped in his life, just as I was now trapped in this bed. "So what now?" I whispered. "Now," he said, "we fight." He was true to his word. He moved me, as he had planned, a private jet, a team of specialists. We left New York. We left that whole life. We went to the clinic in Switzerland, a place that looked more like a 5-star hotel nestled in the Alps. And the fight began. My recovery was brutal. It was hours of physical therapy every single day. It was learning to command muscles that no longer listened. It was setbacks and tears and a rage so deep I thought it would consume me. And he was there. He was my general. He was my attendant. He was my chief and only friend. He learned my therapy. He would be in the pool with me, his strong arms holding me up as I tried to kick. He would sit for hours, talking to me, reading to me, or just being silent with me. And I learned to love him, not as the dark, intimidating boss, but as the man who held my hair back when the medication made me sick, as the man who celebrated when I finally felt a flicker of sensation in my left toe. It was a love built not on romance, but on shared survival, on the foundation of our two broken worlds colliding and somehow creating a new one. It took a year, a whole grueling year. The first time I stood, I was leaning on him, and we both cried. The first time I took a step with a cane, he smiled, a real, genuine smile. It transformed his face. It was like watching the sun rise for the first time. We moved to the house he had bought, the one in Wyoming. It was not a house, it was a fortress. But it was a fortress of glass and warm wood, overlooking a valley so vast and quiet, it felt like the edge of the world. There was no one for miles, just us, the mountains, and the sky. He had done it. He had built a new life. He was a different man. His work was different now. I would see him on the phone, his voice that same low command, but the words were different. Leverage, acquisitions, market share. He was building a new empire, a legitimate one. He was more powerful now. He told me than he ever had been with a gun. He was just as ruthless, but his weapon was his mind and the market. We found our peace. We built a life, a quiet one. I could not be a surgeon, Not like before, but I consulted, I did research. He learned to chop wood. He learned to ride a horse. I watched him one day, in the snow. His face turned to the wind, and he looked free. We loved each other, a deep, quiet, profound love. We had forged it in fire, and it was stronger than steel. We were two survivors, a mafia boss who had learned to be a man, and a doctor who had learned to fight. Then, one day, the old world came knocking. We were eating dinner. It was winter, 2 years after Switzerland. A blizzard was raging outside. It was a simple meal, one I had cooked. I was walking, almost perfectly, just a slight limp on bad days. A black car, one I had not seen before, rolled up the long, private drive. Jack had not been expecting anyone. He was on his feet in an instant. The man he used to be was not gone. He was just sleeping. He stood by the window. I stood beside him. A man got out, an older man. His face a map of old world lines. Uncle Paolo? Jack let him in. The cold air swirled around the old man as he stood in our foyer, dripping snow onto the hardwood floor. He was not looking at Jack. He was looking at me. "So," Paolo said, his voice a rasp, "this is it. The fortress on the hill, for her. Paolo." Jack's voice was low, polite, but with an edge of steel I knew well. "You are a long way from home. Home is complicated," the old man said. He looked at Jack. "Marco is a good boy. He tries, but he is not you. Jack, he's not a king. He is a soldier. And the family, they are fighting. The Caparellis are back. They smell the weakness. They do not respect Marco. They fear you, even in your absence." Jack just watched him. He said nothing. "He needs you, Jack," Paolo said, taking a step closer. "The family needs you. Your name, your strength. Come back, just for a month. Settle this. Show them you are still Jack Forelli." I felt my breath catch. I looked at Jack. I saw the shadow pass over his face, the old, familiar weight of his former life. He was a king, and a king's duty is to his kingdom. He was silent for a long moment. Paolo looked hopeful. He thought he had him. Jack looked at me. He saw my face. The fear that I was so sure was gone. He reached out and took my hand. He laced his fingers with mine. He turned back to his uncle. "I'm sorry for Marco's troubles." "Uncle," Jack said, his voice clear and final. "Send him my best. I will wire him whatever capital he needs. But you tell the families, you tell the Caparellis, that Jack Forelli is dead. He died in a hospital in New York 2 years ago. The man standing here, he belongs to her." Paolo's face went from hope to shock, to a deep, profound anger. "You would throw it all away, your father's legacy, for her." "She is my legacy, Paolo," Jack said, his voice soft, but it was the most powerful thing I had ever heard him say. "Now, you will have a drink, and then my men will drive you back to the airport. The roads are bad." It was not a request. It was an order, the last order of the king. Paolo left. The black car disappeared into the storm. Jack closed the door, the sound of the heavy bolts sliding home echoing in the quiet. He turned to me. The fire was roaring in the hearth. He walked over and pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, wood smoke and safety. "It will not be the last time," I whispered. "They will always come." "Let them," he said, his arms tightening around me. "Let them come. This is our world now, and I will burn down anyone who tries to touch it." I looked up at him, the man carved from stone, the man who had read me poetry, the man who had sacrificed an empire for me. He was not a good man. He was not a simple man, but he was my man. And in the heart of the storm, in our fortress on the hill, we were finally, completely safe. We had found our peace. Not in the absence of darkness, but in the light we had built together, right in the middle of it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so curious. Where are you all listening from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and you can share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video, it would also be a huge help if you could support this story by hitting the hype button so it can be heard by even more people.